Welcome to the Spark of Splendor podcast, where we celebrate everything creative about you. Welcome, welcome. We have Paramananda, the most incredible, talented, multi-talented, rocking the war on illusion, first and foremost, above all else. That is the most important thing. Thank you for being here, Paramananda. I'm so grateful for you. And from the time we met at the Govardhan Eco Village in India, I felt deeply connected, and I'm very grateful to be here today to celebrate the creative spark that is you.
Paris, too, I'm so honored to be on your podcast. This is like something that had to happen. You're a natural podcast host. So when this podcast is huge, I'm going to be like, yeah, I was one of the first people on it. So yeah, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so grateful for your blessings and your encouragement. And yeah, I am just amazed. So you are very multi-talented. You have many bands that you've started. You have a family. You have children. You teach yoga. So many beautiful things about you that I get to experience personally. I'd love to hear something about your childhood that really shaped your worldview.
Wow. Good question right off the bat. I grew up in Westchester. Do you know where Westchester is? Have you ever been to Westchester?
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in a very kind of hoity-toity part of Westchester. My dad was relatively wealthy, and we went to I went to a really nice school with like a lot of rich kids. And I think that was probably like the first Krishna conscious lesson or spiritual lesson that you could say that I learned as a kid, is that money doesn't really translate necessarily into happiness. And I could see it especially with my dad, because I could see how confused my dad was, because my dad, first of all, my grandfather was like the American dream. My grandfather came from Italy on the boat from Italy with my grandmother when they were just married, like young married couple from Italy coming over to America, for a better life. No money in their pocket, nothing. They just kind of came to New York, and they kind of just got dumped off into, the Lower East Side of New York. And
How old were they?
I think they were in their 20s or something like that. Like they were just newly married.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother worked 3 jobs. My grandfather worked 3 jobs. Not only did he work 3 jobs, he put him and her through college. So all they did was work and sleep, like both of them. They were just like so hard, such hardworking people. And then they both graduated with pharmacy degrees. They were pharmacists. And my grandfather had managed to squirrel away enough money to open up a pharmacy in Westchester. And it became wildly successful. And he became pretty wealthy, from owning this pharmacy.
Huh.
And, so from that, my dad started out with a good head start, and then he went to college and he got a good job. And, so we ended up in Westchester. And so I grew up very privileged. And I could see that even though that my dad sort of worked hard, and he had the cars, and he had the big house in Westchester, we had a huge backyard. Things weren't happy for him. He went to a job that he didn't like, and he had to work every day for it. And, him and my mom got divorced, and, we weren't spiritual whatsoever, really growing up. And I could see that he was frustrated, because I could see that he thought, like, what am I doing wrong? I've done everything that they told me I need to do in order to be happy. I made the money. I went to college. I got the good job. I got married. I got the kids. And, he was very frustrated. And I could understand that even from an early age. So I think that was kind of like one of the first lessons that I learned growing up, that this pursuit of money that everybody in my school and all their parents and everybody is so caught up in, I know firsthand it's not really all that it's cracked up to be. And there's got to be something else that makes people more happy. You know, my dad really wanted me to go to college because
Yeah.
I have an older brother and a younger sister, and I definitely got the best grades out of anybody. I pretty much just got straight A's in school, without even trying that much. I was just kind of like good at taking tests and just, going to school and stuff like that. So I was like the big hope for my dad that I was going to go to college and, really, get a good job and make a lot of money. And so when I quit college to tour with my punk band that Ruggenauth was singing for, my dad lost his mind. He couldn't believe that I would sacrifice, that I would just toss away my future just to kind of, play this really raucous music. But from where I was sitting, it's like, why do I want to follow his path that I kind of understand leads to a pretty miserable place? So
Right.
I'm gonna at least try something different. I'm gonna follow my heart. This is something that I'm passionate about. We were in a straight edge band too. The band was Youth of Today that Ruggenauth sang for. If you don't know who Ruggenauth is, he's my friend who's just an outstanding yoga teacher. He also does a lot. He's been in Youth of Today and the band Shelter with me, and he also does the super famous podcast called Wisdom of the Sages that thousands and thousands of people watch every single day.
I love it. I love
Um,
it. I love that. And actually, it was his training. When we first met, he was doing that pilgrimage in India, or it was a yoga teacher training. Though I did go on a pilgrimage with him last year and took like a bunch of my family. Raghunath is amazing, and but just to like reflect what I heard, thank you. And I really appreciate you sharing that, just about like what shaped your worldview, and then seeing your father struggling with like having all this money but being miserable and unhappy, and yet he was kind of expecting you to follow in his footsteps, and you're like, well, no, there's something better for me. And I also listened to one of your interviews where you were sharing how you had even gotten into like in your school, which I didn't realize was a very wealthy school, people were like using like drinking from a very young age, and you quickly were like, this is not for me, and decided to go straight edge.
oh yeah, I don't know how it was in your junior high school, but drinking was so much a part of, it was the 80s. So it was like 80s culture was all about partying, and all the movies were about partying, Animal House and Fast Times at Ridgemont High and all those kind of movies. So it was really, it was really glorified and accepted in culture. I think it's still, it still
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And even that, I didn't realize until you explained that Minor Threat song, the straight edge song was like the first. And I was like, oh, Paramananda, thank you. You like connect the dots for me. Because what does that even mean? It means like being like not drinking and not smoking and not using drugs. Straight edge is to like just be completely sober.
Yeah.
Right?
Straight edge was mostly like a subgenre of punk rock, which was almost like the rebellion to the rebellion, because punk rockers kind of looked around the world and they didn't like what they saw, so they're just like, I'm going to just go against everything.
Yeah.
And that's how I was also when I was a kid. Like, I just looked out at the world and I looked at, I just couldn't really make sense of it, and they said, I'm going to just you know get a funny haircut and wear weird clothes and just let everybody know that I'm different. I don't want all this stuff that's being pushed on us. And, I just want to go a different route with my life. But the funny thing is, I didn't like high school culture, because what was high school culture? You'd drag a keg out into the woods, you'd get drunk, and by the time I went straight edge, kids were like, by the time that was like in my school and in my environment, kids started drinking super early. Like I think I started drinking on a regular basis when I was like 12. I mean, it helped that I had an older brother who was
Yeah.
older than me. He used to bring me to parties and stuff like that. But it just seemed like a pretty normal thing that kids would, and alcohol amongst all the parents was super accepted. I mean, all the parents drank, and uh, so maybe other drugs were kind of looked down on, but
Yeah.
drinking was like everybody drinks. It was
Yeah.
normal. So, but I saw that by the time that I was like 15, and about ready to like starting high school and getting into high school and stuff, my friends were really starting to up the game as far as drugs went. At first it was pot, and then it was coke, and it's a really kind of like, the kids are wealthy enough to get coke. So there's coke, there's pot. Kids are doing all sorts of like weird new drugs and things like that. And I wasn't into it. I really, even when I did drink, I really didn't like it. I just think I just had a predisposition from a last life that I kind of figured that out, that drugs were a source of misery instead of a source of
Amazing.
instead of
I
a
mean,
source
that's
of joy.
amazing that, and it's like, I think to what's on your shirt about the war on illusion is like so many of the things that we think are meant to like bring some pleasure or some perceived pleasure or acquired taste. A lot of it is just illusory.
It really it's such an illusion, because an illusion is you take something for something different than it really is. And you just see all these like 14, 15-year-old kids. And then it got into like, it wasn't even beer anymore. Then the cool thing was like, I remember, when I turned like 15, instead of everybody having a beer at parties, that wasn't even cool enough. I remember everybody used to get these, like, there was these little bottles of Jack Daniels.
Mm.
And so you'd have these like 14, 15-year-old kids, and they'd be walking around parties with these bottles of Jack Daniels. And that is like, oh my God, for a 15-year-old kid to be drinking that really hard whiskey like that,
It's so sad. And that was like back in that time. And then I'm just like, are kids just addicted to their phones now? Is that like the new addiction?
no, it's way worse. Now kids are doing Molly and pills and
Oh
fentanyl.
no.
Yeah,
Oh
it's
no.
actually way worse now. But I could see all these kids, when you're 15 and you weigh like whatever, 120 pounds or 115 pounds or something, and you're drinking like, really hard alcohol like that, you very quickly get alcohol poisoning. People are throwing up left and right. And I was just like, this is not fun. um,
Yeah. So,
it,
and so you took that, you were like, clear, this is not for me. This is not fun. And you had this kind of last life, maybe carried over some sense of like, this is not for me. And I want to focus on developing a better relationship with the world and myself. And so it seems, and from what the amount of work you've done as a creative and the number of bands that you have and have been a part of, um, just how you've been able to channel your energy into creative pursuits. And I'd love to hear about, um, yeah, just how that's that ability to focus your energy, and have you just speak a little bit about that with us.
well, it was so great that I was into punk rock. Like, no matter what people think about punk rock, and people have all these misconceptions about, people are going to shows and spitting on each other, and the Sex Pistols and blood, and there's so much like media hype on punk rock, but really punk rock was super empowering for a young kid, because I grew up and I was into rock music. I was into like guitar type music. I played guitar. And if you listen to all those bands like pre-punk rock, they were just musical virtuosos. I mean, you had like Eddie Van Halen, and you had Guns N' Roses, and all these bands where the musicianship was just like incredible. Rush and AC/DC.
Mm-hmm.
And so being in a band, it seemed like just too far out of my reach, as a musician, although I loved playing guitar and stuff like that. But when I found punk rock was, it sort of leveled the playing field. It's like, you got something to say. Like if you have some sort of like, burning message inside of you that you feel the need to get out and tell people, you learn a few chords on guitar and you just get up there and you say whatever you got to say. And it was really super empowering for a young kid, for even all my friends. We were all in bands, and it was really cool because, when you're a kid, especially when you're a teenager, you have all these things on your mind, and things that are troubling you and things that are going on in your life. Your parents are on your case in your school, and you're having a hard time with your teachers. And it gave you this, like, you could just scroll down a little poem about all the things that were bothering you in your life, or aspirations that you might have had, or things that you want to change in the world. And you just play a few chords and you get up there. And it wasn't so much about the musical virtuosity. It was just about the energy and the passion and the message that you kind of brought to the table.
And I want to acknowledge you here for a moment because when I was like a 13-year-old kid and I was driving around with my sisters, or they were driving the car, and they had all these mixtapes, and they had like one of my sisters is like all into punk rock and hardcore punk rock. And then she would play some of your music, right? Like some of Shelter. And I'd listen to the lyrics, and I was hearing these lyrics, and I was just like, oh, like about how to be kind to the animals, or to really think about what my life means, and what does it mean to have a relationship with a higher power. And if there's a gun to my head, like, am I gonna pray for my salvation? So I think about, like, and also just like some of the mantras I had heard at that time, like just being like, what is this? Like, this is fascinating. Like, really, I was just like, I want to know what that sound is and what it means. But I had no like Google. I couldn't Shazam it. Like there was just kind of like the information wasn't like it is today. So I just kind of had a very limited understanding, and I just appreciated it. And it wasn't until years later that I was like, oh my God, I know, like this was Prabhupada. Sit properly in the song. Like that was like, it was one of the greatest teachers bringing Bhakti yoga to the West, and how he was able to like be in your hardcore punk rock songs, and that should just somehow permeate into our lives. And that should even make my sister be interested in taking classes on the Gita, which then she invited me to the classes, and see the impact that you following your passion and just writing a few things down and sharing it has had such a tremendous impact. And so I really acknowledge you, and am grateful for you, Paramananda, and the rest of the band for bringing that into the world.
Wow, thank you so much. I appreciate that. But it was a really cool time to be a young kid and have that musical outlet of all the things that you were passionate about and all the things you just want to scream out there to the world. You could do it. You could literally scream them out to the world. So when I met Raghunath, one of the things that we were really passionate about is that, I liked punk. I liked the energy of the music. I liked the different ideas that were kind of, that I was learning from listening to Dead Kennedys records and Black Flag records and Minor Threat records. It was all very refreshing to me because these were things that weren't really being talked about in my school. Even like politics of the Dead Kennedys and stuff like that. But what I didn't like about it is, first of all, I wasn't into the party scene in my school. That's what when I got into punk, that's what I was trying to get away from.
Yeah.
Going to parties, people doing a lot of drugs, people getting in fights, a bunch of stupid drama. But when I started going to punk shows, it just seemed like the same thing. It was just people with leather jackets on, getting drunk, getting into fights, partying. And so when me and Raghunath were starting that band that we did, Youth of Today, our idea was we want to be the revolution to the revolution, because here's all these punk rockers. They understand that what's going on out there, there's something wrong with it. And we have to go a different way. But then we saw that they're not really going a different way. They're kind of just going the same way.
Mm-hmm.
They're just listening to more wild music. So we wanted to do a straight edge band. And we saw that as like, that's the real revolution. Everybody's getting messed up on drugs. That's part of the problem of what we can see. And
Yeah.
it's even permeated the punk scene.
And it's
So
not going against the grain if everybody's doing it.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. It's feeding right into what the mainstream is shoving down your throat. Like, I thought it was so not punk. And I saw that like straight edge, this is actually something that's punk. This is something that's different. This is something that's counter. This is something that's revolutionary. So we were super passionate about kind of spreading that message in the punk scene. And what was really cool is a lot of people felt the same way. So we would go out and we would play. And, before you know it, this whole kind of like straight edge, you could call it like a youth movement started. And then other bands came, like Uniform Choice and Gorilla Biscuits and Bold. And, this whole big kind of thing started. And it was really exciting to be part of. It wasn't like the civil rights movement of the 60s or something on a grand scale like that, but in our own little microcosm of a world, it was a big deal. Like we really felt like we're part of something that's bigger than ourselves, which is such a good feeling. Like, I think that's kind of like the way that I am now. Like, I like to have a mission, because even from the time that I was young, when we were doing Youth Today, we really felt like this is a mission. Like, this isn't just something that we're trying to do for ourselves. This is like a bigger picture kind of thing. We're trying to spread a message that's bigger than us, that can benefit other people. And we were sincere and serious about it. And so it gave me a taste for that, for living for a principle that's higher than yourself. Because most people are just living for themselves. And even that's like the start of yoga, is to take yourself and your own big ego out of the center, and you put something else in the center, and you serve the center. And so it was almost like what we were doing was a punk rock version of yogic principles, you could even say. It was a really cool time.
I love that. Like a punk rock version of the yogic principles.
It was. And of course, we finally figured out that the center is actually Krishna. like the center is like, there is an absolute source. That's the center. That's the source of everything and everybody. And when you align in harmony with the energy of God, with the energy of divinity, that's when all the wrinkles start to come out. And so then we started to sing about that. We started Shelter, which was kind of cool, because punk rock, at least at the time, I don't know about now, but at the time, punk rock was very anti-authoritarian, and religion was thrown in there too. So any kind of thing that had to do with religion was just very, very put down in punk rock. And so when Shelter first started, and here's all these guys that are into like the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna and Bhakti, and we would have people boycotting our shows, like literally throwing stuff at us, boycotting the shows. No gods, they would have like big signs, no gods, no masters. Yeah, so that was kind of a super confrontational time when the band first started.
So how did you navigate that? Like what happened? How did you move through that?
Well, it was very good for my spiritual life personally,
Hmm.
because we have this we live in a very, like, especially since the pandemic, like in just in the last few years, we live in a culture that's very censored. And like the open debate of ideas is almost like it's frowned upon, which is ridiculous, because when you have people with opposing ideas coming together and talking about it,
Healthy
that's when the
debate.
truth rises. Yeah, that's when the truth rises to the top.
Hmm.
So as a person who was into Krishna and into Bhakti and into all this Vedic stuff, it tested me, because very, very smart people in the hardcore scene would come up to me and they would be like, "Why are you doing this? Um, why do you believe in God? It's such a ridiculous thing that you think God is a blue cowherd boy. Explain yourself.
Hmm.
Why do you worship these statues?" And they're all very good questions. And being like a young kid, like in my early 20s, I didn't have all the answers to them. So when I would go to shows and people would come up and they would be very challenging to the philosophy of bhakti, if I didn't have the answers, I would have to go find the answers. And I
Right.
think I think just that, it it made me become more stable in more stable in like what I was actually doing. Like what were the reasons behind why I was doing that? Because a lot of people can get into things for all the wrong reasons. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Uh, and even according to our philosophy, when you do things without understanding the real import, the real importance of what they are, then everything just becomes very ritualistic.
Yeah,
And
like
there's
that
and
idea of
there's
agraha, to do without knowing the reason or purpose. That's
Yeah, exactly.
definition. Like to do be very strict about the rules and regulations, forgetting the purpose, or on the other hand, not doing any rules and regulations and just whimsically doing whatever you feel like and having no um regulation or channel or vehicle in which to experience a relationship with divinity.
Exactly. There has to be the middle path. And so it helped me immensely. And luckily I had my guru and I had senior devotees.
You
Like
met your guru when?
um God, what year was it? Maybe 93.
And where?
I first met him at Gita Nagari. I was living at Gita Nagari.
Mm.
And Raghunath had asked me to join Shelter, and he wanted me to move to Philadelphia at the Philly Temple. And when the farm found out about that, they were super upset because there was only 2 workers on the farm. And so it was basically me and my friend Sachi Sutta were taking care of like over 100 cows, which is a huge job. So we're working like 8 to 10 hours a day every day taking care of all these cows. And so the farm was very upset, and then Raghunath was very adamant about getting me in Shelter because they needed a guitar player. And finally, my guru Ravinder Swarup Prabhu came out to the farm, and he talked to me about it, and it was really sweet. He just said, "You know what? I think what's best for your spiritual life is if you come to Philadelphia. I think you'll have better association there. There's a lot of kids your age that live at the temple." And so he really endeared himself to me because I really felt, even from that first time I met him, he was really looking out for
Mm.
my best interest, not the best interest of like, the bureaucracy of, the movements and the temples and, things like that, but really what was in my personal best interest. So that was super sweet. So I met him. He's brilliant. He's a PhD, he's a PhD, Ivy League PhD. He knows everything about, not just Bhakti and Hinduism, but about all different, religions. Uh, and what's cool about, when I first got into Krishna consciousness, you could say Bhakti, now it's kind of like, people would just say Bhakti, but it just seemed like there was certain people that could answer any single question that I had, like no matter what. You know who was like that? Do you know Satyaraj, right? Stephen
Satyaraj.
Stephen
Oh,
Rosen.
oh yes, yes, I know him. I do. I do. I met him at the Bhakti Center. Okay, I forgot that name of his. Yes, yes, he's written many books.
Yeah, he was one of those people that I used to go to, and with any question, he could give me a very rational, satisfying answer,
Mm.
which was amazing. You know, why don't you eat meat? He would lay it out, and it was funny because, I grew up Catholic. I remember going to CCD, which is the Catholic school that you have to go to get your confirmation. And I remember there would be kids that would ask the priest, like, but what happens if there's like, because the priest would say something like, if you don't accept Jesus in your heart, you go to hell for all eternity.
Yeah,
And then the rational question to ask is, well, what if there's a person out there who's a sincere spiritualist? He's just in a different religion. Like,
yeah,
what happens to that person? And the priest would say, they go straight to hell. That's what it says in the Bible. And I was just thinking, like, that's not a good answer. That's just some kind of dogmatic rhetoric that even a 13-year-old kid can figure out, But it was different at the Krishna temple. Like, I could go and I could ask Satyaraj and other people and my guru all these questions, and they would have really good answers for them, really logical, rational answers. Even if you ask, like, you could go up to a Christian devotee, you could say, why do you believe that God's a blue cowherd boy? And I bet you I could probably make a pretty reasonable argument for that. As something as wild as that, there's actually some rationality behind it that you're just like, oh, now I get it. Now I get why you're doing what you're doing. So we would go on tour and we would get challenged all the time, and I would have all these questions that I couldn't answer.
yeah.
And I'd bring them back. I'd ask my girl, oh my God, we were at this show and this guy stumped me on this question. And I would ask other people and ask, senior devotee, because we always stayed at temples on tour. And so
Mm.
we'd ask sannyasis and monks and senior devotees. And it was a great learning experience.
That's amazing. Go ahead.
I'm a really big proponent of healthy, open debate. Like, I can't stand censorship.
Mm-hmm.
I hate the fact that you have these like politicians that are like, I'm not going to go to the debate. It's like, are you kidding me? Of course you got to go to the debate. That's where the cream rises to the top. That's where you separate the fanatics from the rational people, and you figure out who's the best candidate, for office.
Yeah.
And it seems like lately we're really moving away from that. And if you have an opposing view, you're not allowed to talk about it. You're just kind of talked down on, people deplatform you. It even happened like during the pandemic. Like, if you were against vaccinations or you had even a question about vaccination, you were deplatformed. You
Mm-hmm.
couldn't even talk. They would take away your avenue for communicating with other people. It's
Yeah.
not it's not healthy, and it's not the way that you get at truth. So I actually, even though it was tough in the beginning days of shelter, because you had to field all these rational questions about what you were doing and what you believed in, it made me a much better devotee in the end.
Wow, that's incredible. First of all, just like imagining you on tour and then getting hounded with all these questions, like, what's up with you guys? And we're not like, what's this religious stuff? And yeah, everyone's got their perception of what things are externally without the understanding. And then how you were able to go to your teachers and sannyasis and different people who really studied and lived these teachings and be like, hey, I don't know how to answer this question. And by having that emotional experience, it like deeply internalized those teachings for you because you were so open, and it deepened and continued to deepen. Go ahead.
Paris, you said exactly what I was feeling, much better than I said it. So thank you.
No, you did a great job of explaining. That was beautiful. And so I wonder, like, after that, did it change? How did it change as your knowledge increased and is continuing to increase?
It did change. It was only like that for maybe the first year or so that I was in the band, when we really started touring and going to Europe and things like that. And I think what changed was, I think people started reading the lyrics and understanding that, man, like a lot of the stuff that this band is singing about, I actually agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time the band actually got kind of big, there wasn't that pushback anymore. It was almost like, uh, I think people understood the band a little bit more, and therefore they weren't so, uh, what's the right word? I don't know, intimidated by it or whatever. You know what it's like? I always use this example. When you walk into a dark room, immediately your mind is like, oh my God, is there a guy in a gun in this room? Like, is there something in this room that's going to hurt me? I can't see. You get like a little nervous. But when you turn on the light and you see, oh, there's nothing in this room, this room is perfectly safe. I think it's like that too. I think when people finally understood what the band was really saying, and it didn't come across as culty and irrational, and people could even be like, hey, I could even get behind a lot of the stuff that's in these songs. I think the mood towards Shelter completely changed,
Mm.
and it just stayed like that the whole time that I was in the band. So things did change, and they changed pretty quickly.
And that's amazing also. Like, I'm sure part of it is like how you experienced it also changed the resistance because it was so deep. The deeper it became for you, the less resistance from others, because it's like you're living it and you're practicing it. So it's resonating more deeply for others.
Very true. Very true. And what also helped is that this sweatshirt wore an illusion. It's actually I used to do a fanzine, because in punk rock fanzines were super popular. You'd make a little magazine, you'd get it printed, or you staple it together, whatever. You go to shows and you sell it for a quarter or whatever. And so I had done a big hardcore fanzine before I was a devotee. So when I got into Shelter, I did my own fanzine that was called War and Illusion. It actually just last year or so, I did 3 issues, and our record label took it and they took all 3 issues and they made it into a book, and they
Amazing.
added all this extra stuff to it. I think I got one. Hold on a second.
That is amazing.
Yeah, so they took it and they made it into a book, which came out last year. I just found out today, somebody said it's sold out and they were looking for a copy of it, but maybe they'll repress it or whatever. But what was really cool about this is that um, this was specifically for people who had questions about what we were doing. And so I wrote this whole kind of fanzine, and it had music stuff in it and interviews with different bands, um, that were either Krishna bands or some sort of like, kind of spiritual bands or spiritual adjacent bands or straight edge bands and things like that. But it also had a lot of articles just about Bhakti or Krishna consciousness in general, to kind of demystify the whole thing for people who were just stumbling upon Shelter and wondering, like, what's this all about? Like, these guys are, the whole thing seems very foreign. They're practicing this foreign religion, and they got the weird ponytails, and they're all dressed in orange. Like, what is this all about? So I did that fanzine, and I tried to address a lot of the questions, and I think it had At least I like to think it had a good impact on kind of demystifying what the band was all about.
That's incredible. Wow. I didn't even know about that. So the fanzine started a while ago, but then last year you continued it.
Yeah. Well, I didn't continue it. They took the old issues and they
Oh, and they turned
reissued
it
it
into a
as a
book.
book.
Oh, okay, that's amazing. Is there something you'd want to share from that or
Ah,
a story?
well, one of the best, I when I got it, I read the whole thing cover to cover, and I hadn't read it in a long time, you know, because it came out like in the '90s.
Yeah.
But one of the best things that's in here is you know who Bhakti Tirtha Swami is, don't you?
Yes, I'm such a big fan. I have a couple of his books right here, one that I'm reading at the moment. I'm such a fan. He's just, but you knew him, so please tell us. You knew him
Well,
personally.
we played a show. Shelter played a show in Washington D.C. where his temple was,
Yeah.
and so he came to the show. And I had met him before. He came to Philadelphia a bunch of times, and I loved him. I loved his classes. You couldn't help but love him. He was just so powerful and empowered and such a strong speaker and such a clear thinker and such a revolutionary that like he really resonated with me. And so I was so happy when we played in DC, he came to the show. And it was weird because in the Krishna movement at the time, people were sort of like polarized by Shelter. Like some people thought this is so cool. There's so many of these new kids coming to the temple now. And there was other more conservative people from the movement and the temples are like, this is Maya. Like they're playing punk rock. This is embarrassing for Prabhupada. They should stop doing this immediately. Um, so whenever we had senior devotees would come and see us, it was sort of a big deal because they were one of the people that were open-minded enough to sort of like, that thought
Encourage.
what we were doing is a good thing. So he came and it was so cool. There's all these kids, it's a punk show. People got mohawks and tattoos and, green hair. And then all of a sudden, I'm setting stuff up on stage and I just see the door open. And there's just this man like dressed in orange. And he's got this cane with a big Nishringadev carved into the top of the cane. And he's just like, when he enters a room, his energy just fills the whole entire room. That's just like the type of person he was. And so he just walked into that room with that cane and he was so effulgent. It was like, wow, Bhakti Tirtha Swami's here. It was such a big deal. And then he came and he was right on the side of the stage and he was right on my side of the stage. And he watched the whole show from my side of the stage. And it was a great show. It was wild. Kids were singing along and stage diving and piling up on the mic, 20 people trying to sing along at the same time. It was a wild, wild show. And, so you always think like, what does this saintly person think about all this stuff? So we went back to he had his center there that he ran and he sat us down. He was like, I loved it. You guys are like, you're like, it's like spiritual espionage. You're going in disguised as a hardcore band and you're giving people the absolute truth. I love it. This is a revolution. You guys are thinking like I think. And so he was so cool. And he gave us a donation. I forget how much money he gave us. He gave us like $500 and he goes, I support you guys so much. I want to give you a donation. Now, if you know anything about Vedic culture,
Yeah.
you're supposed to give the monks donations. The
Mhm.
monks aren't supposed to donate to you. You're supposed to give, the monks basically, they're the ones that don't get involved with money and things like that. But he gave us a donation because he was so into what we were doing. And so and I was doing the fanzine at the time. And so the next morning, after breakfast, I asked Bhakti Tirtha Swami if I could interview him for the fanzine. And
Oh,
it's really cool. Let me see if I can find it. It was great. And I took some pictures of him and stuff too. It's called Hardcore Scene Politics with Bhakti Tirtha Swami.
oh,
And it's such a good interview. And it was so cool because I got to spend the whole entire, like the half a day with him. Like I spent like 4 or 5 hours with him. And it was real, like just me and him in his room. And it was super special. It's one of like in my whole, like, devotional life. It's one of those memories that I have that I really cherish. Like being alone one-on-one with Bhakti Tirtha Swami for hours and hours, just getting to talk to him and interview him. It was really special.
oh.
And
And
he passed away not long after that. I think like a year later he had passed away. So I felt super fortunate that I got that personal association with him, which was really beautiful. So I was reading the fanzine, and that was one of the things that was really special to me when I reread it.
oh my God, I love it. I can't wait to read that article.
Yeah, it's
Well,
great.
can I get that? Can I see the article? Where is it like?
I can bring one to the Bhakti Center. I only have one. I only have my personal copy, and I literally, somebody Instagrammed me just today asking where I could get a copy because they went to the record label and they tried to order it and they said it was sold out. So I
Hmm,
don't know if they're going to be printing more or if it's just like now it's just going to be out of print or whatever. But I can let you read that article for sure.
thank you. I'd love to, even if you sent me the photos, I'd love to read it. I'm so my heart is warmed by that story. It really is beautiful. And I feel like Bhakti Tirtha Swami, like I feel his energy even today through the lectures I get to hear. Like it's so endearing, so beautiful. The quality of the energy. I can hear him even coming from his books, and that's like a very
Yeah,
thing. And that the saint is still their soul is still giving blessings and is still very present, even if we don't see that physically.
that, that's true. If anybody's out there and they want to look into Bhakti Tirtha Swami, you can just look him up on YouTube, and there's a lot of great lectures on YouTube. Bhakti Tirtha Swami.
And I'll put some
And
below.
yeah, you can put some links or in in the notes or whatever. And also, I highly recommend his Spiritual Warrior series. He wrote a bunch of books that are called Spiritual Warriors,
Yeah,
Spiritual Warrior with different subheadings, and they're excellent. They're such good books.
they really are.
So
I have a couple of them. I haven't gone through all of them, but there's so many. There's just like, and then he did a whole series. There's a series on leadership. There's just so much, and it's really extraordinary because he was doing a lot to help transform our relationship with what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a spiritual leader, a spiritual warrior. It's incredible. So
and
incredible.
he was a real independent thinker too. Like he didn't exactly fit the mold of what people thought a sannyasi should be. But sometimes he wouldn't dress exactly like an Indian sannyasi. He would go to Africa and he was actually super successful in, you know, he was like a real revolutionary as far as bringing bhakti to Africa. He was a real key person that, was first introducing bhakti to Africa. And so he would dress in African clothes when he went there.
Yeah.
And and his thing was, I want to build bridges. I don't want like instead of making this thing less digestible for people, let's make it more digestible for people.
Yeah, yeah. Like he talk about the distinction between Christianity and churchianity and how like it's important to understand the difference between like what the church built versus what was like essential to the teachings of Christianity. And because he came from a Christian background. So just so interesting. But please continue.
yeah, he was just such a forward thinker. He was so sharp. And his idea was, I just want to give this, I just want to give this knowledge to people. And so, whatever format that I have to give this to people, I'll give it to them. It was almost like shelter, you know. We want to spread a message. Okay, well, what's our circle of influence? We were in all these hardcore bands, so why don't we just do a hardcore band where we sing about all these principles that we're into now? And it was a great, even though the music might have been this raucous, like wild music, and kids would stage dive at the shows and stuff like that, people were getting the message. It wasn't just entertainment. Especially in punk rock, it's way beyond just. Most people have this idea of music as just entertainment, but punk was never like that. Punk was always about, the message is as important as the music.
Yeah.
And so a lot, the people that were into Shelter, they were into Shelter not just because of the music, but because of the message behind the music. So we put in a format that they could understand and they could appreciate. And I think that's important, for people when they think about how can I communicate something that's like really deep in my heart. You have to, sometimes you have to come up with some novel ways to communicate that.
And that's right. It's just kind of being creative and like breaking through creative blocks and kind of getting over what you think things are supposed to be.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Even like, I remember sometimes back in Shelter, we would get like real sort of old school conservative, Krishna type people who would be like, you guys shouldn't be doing this. You should be out just distributing on the street corner, distributing Prabhupada's books. And, although I think it's great that people are out distributing Prabhupada's books, I think it's like an incredible service. I don't think it's the only service. And I don't think like, it was funny because one time it was my guru's Vyasa Puja, which is my guru's birthday. They call it the Vyasa Puja. And part of my Vyasa Puja offering was I was talking about Shelter, and because he was a huge proponent of Shelter. And he was like he was one of these heads of the GBC, which is the governing body for the whole Krishna movement around the world. And he unabashedly was like, Shelter's great. You should see how many young kids are coming to the temples these days. And it's all due to this band Shelter. If you think you're against it, you shouldn't be against it because this is a great thing. And he even wrote, Prabhupada's magazine was called Back to Godhead magazine. And he even wrote an article about when he went to a Shelter show, and he wrote this whole really kind of cool article about punk and all these kids that were reading the Bhagavad Gita at the Shelter show and stuff like that. So he was a big proponent of what we were doing. And so I wrote, I forget exactly what I wrote in my offering. At Vyasa Puja, all the students of the teacher, they'll write an offering and they'll write something glorifying the teacher. And so he said in return, he said, he said, even if he goes, it was so great that what you guys were doing was actually making a dent. And you were inspiring kids to get into a spiritual, association with people. And they would come to temples and they would read books. And he was like, that was so great. But even if you guys didn't inspire anybody, I thought it was so great. Because he said when his teacher was Srila Prabhupada, who was the founder of this whole, he basically brought Bhakti to America, his teacher in the 60s, which was my guru's teacher. And he said, when I saw Prabhupada, I saw how he was expert in seeing what people's talents were and engaging people according to their talents. Because, that's another thing about creativity is like, you love to do it. You know what I mean? So sure, you might have to like, sure, there's things like when you live in a temple, sure, you have to wash the pots, you have to wash the floor, you have to clean the bathroom, you have to do all that stuff. But above and beyond that, your main service should be something that harnesses your talents.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was saying, like, I saw you kids, you're super energetic, you know, semi hyper kids, which we were. You're just, over flooding with energy, and you're all musicians. You all have this musical talent. Why not harness that energy and your abilities and your focus and the talents and all the things you like to do and your creative ability, and have you do that in a spiritual way? So I always try to encourage you guys in that. And
Mm.
even if nobody else was listening, it would have been good for you guys to just use your talents in a spiritual way. And he said it was just icing on the cake that other people just happened to listen to your band and also get into it. And I thought that was another really just sweet thing. And it's also an important principle about spiritual life in general. Like some people they love art. So why not do art, spiritually based art? Or some people love to cook. Great, you can even cook for Krishna. You look at Divya's kitchen. You look at the restaurant that's below the Bhakti Center. She's such a talent. She's the most talented chef in the world,
I love it.
practically.
It's my favorite place to go eat in New York.
Yeah, me too, hands down. It's probably the best restaurant in the world. So Krishna consciousness, it's not, and just Bhakti in general, it's almost like it's not what you do, it's how you do it. You can take anything that you're passionate about and your creative talents, even I remember you at the Eco Village and you're taking these notes and you're drawing all these pictures and you're making like these they're almost like these beautiful art books of notes, that you were taking during all the classes. And I thought, how great, here's this girl, she's got all this artistic talent and she's using it to help her imbibe all these teachings that she's coming up with. Yeah, that's like even that, like even yourself, it's such a great example. I wish people would do more of that, actually.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. I love that you said it's not just what you do, but it's how you do it. And like embracing the things that we are curious about, our natural talents, and just like allowing ourselves to be engaged in, and what better than to engage it in a higher purpose, which coming back to your original point towards the beginning of this conversation where you were sharing, doing things for something bigger than just yourself.
Right. Yeah, that's what it's all about.
And yeah, like to really, it's like, for me, the notes are like, I'm learning, but if I could share them with somebody and they could learn, then even better. So I feel inspired to even share some of those notes again, and they're just sitting there and I'm like, I'll look at them and I'll remember, and maybe it'll also help somebody else.
They're great. I think you should do some kind of book.
Oh,
You should take your notes and just have you like gone through the whole Bhagavad Gita and made your art notes?
oh,
That would be an interesting Bhagavad Gita study guide.
oh my.
The art book study guide to the Gita. That would be cool. I bet you people would get so much out of it. There's probably tons of artistic people that learn through art much better than just learning and sitting down and reading, that would really love something like that. You should consider it.
Thank you for your blessings and encouragement. I'm like, maybe this could be a project, like a collaborative project with some other artists, because it's a lot and there's so much depth and richness there. Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you, Paramananda, for that encouragement. So grateful to you. And I'm like seeing that we're like, I'm looking at the time and I'm like, wait a minute, did this just happen? I honestly, like, I'm kind of still navigating this personally, where I'm like, I had like a lot of questions at first that I wrote down, and then I was like, as I've interviewed people, I'm like, well, maybe I don't need to even like just toss the questions to the side and like really just listen and try to like see what, because some of the questions are just like going deeper into what was just said instead of like, what's on your nightstand, or there's um yeah, there's like certain things that can be almost a distraction. So I'm part of this is a creative journey for me of like knowing what to like how to steer this, and like the most important thing is just to be really present in my heart and like to really be attentive. And that said, I still feel at this point, I'm like, well, I didn't even get to ask you, like, what are some of the things you're most excited about right now? Or like you have a new band that, happened over COVID and has just been emerging. And yeah, like just, I'd love to hear a little bit, anything you'd like to share about what you're really excited about at the moment.
All right. I'll definitely do that. Hold on. It's getting dark here. Let me turn the light on.
Okay.
I'm glad you asked about the new band because I love plugging the new band.
Yeah.
I have a new band that I play guitar for that has a girl singer. So I never did a band with a girl even in the band before, what to speak of the singer.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy with it. We just came out with a record. The band is called Values Here. And we just came out with a 13-song record that we worked for years on. And so I was so happy to see it finally materialize and come out. And I'm super proud of it. I think it came out really, really great. And we're actually we've done 2 videos, so you can look us up on YouTube.
Nice.
And we're actually filming a 3rd video the first week of December. And we're getting together and we're going to be practicing. And I'm leading a yoga retreat to India in January and February. But when we get back from that, we're going to start touring and playing around and stuff like that. So I'm super excited about it.
Amazing. So you're doing a yoga retreat and then you're also going to be touring when you get back.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. And why Values Here? Why did you call it that?
It's an old hardcore song by this band called Dag Nasty, which is a band that I really loved.
Oh.
And so it's kind of a nod to that old hardcore band that we really liked.
And you mutually had this like love of that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Beautiful. Thank you so much. So much. I'm so grateful, Paramananda, for your energy, your care for sharing your heart and sharing yourself, bringing such great energy into everything that you do, sharing the insight that your 12-year-old or 15-year-old self had. Like just the journey we've been on has been amazing, about the creative process, about getting blessings from teachers, about doing things that aren't fitting into some mold. And actually about fitting into the molds, I find it so interesting how every teacher seems to have their own very unique way of being. Like I see that there's no real cookie cutter. It's not a cookie cutter, in fact. It seems like there are some standards, but like every personality, like every teacher that you meet is so unique and seems to bring the same loving message, but like in their very unique way. Like Sachinandana Swami and Radhanath Swami and like all these teachers and your guru, Bhakti Swami, but such different flavors. And so that appreciation of like, there is what is unique to you and the celebration of what is unique to you, and also kind of taking some risk. I think that's something that I'm personally navigating, is just like how to take risk and how to like get over all the fear of how will this be perceived? What will other people think? And just like letting go of that.
I can imagine that doing a podcast is almost like putting out a record. If you go through that whole thing when you put out the record too, like, are people going to like it? What are people going to think about it? So doing, whenever you do something creative and you just take what's in your heart, you just throw it out there to the world. There's always that, there's always some kind of like fear and insecurity that you have to get over to just do it. So I appreciate you doing the podcast too, because I'm sure there's stuff like that must come up also
Yeah,
for
for
you.
sure. And I think, well, it's a little different. I actually listened to an interview the other day about how, like, maybe with books, the bar is much higher. Like, if you're gonna release a book, it's like it's really got to be really freaking good because you must have edited that thing many times. Whereas, like with podcasts, it's like it's a conversation. You're not always gonna have a perfect conversation. And but yes, hopefully you learn to develop that. You know, I think that's something I'm also learning. Like I'm in a coaching training at the moment, so I'm learning about how to be a better listener and how to like be open to just hearing instead of like trying to steer things in a particular direction. So like it's kind of a little bit of, I think, creativity, celebration of creativity, but also like yeah, appreciation and allowing what needs to emerge. Oops, my clipboard. Allowing what needs to emerge or what wants to emerge in the moment. And I think there's an element of like letting go of control and just letting things evolve or like grow. And that's kind of unpredictable. And in some ways in my life, I'm very like, okay, let's follow this, like this is how we're gonna do it. But I feel in my heart that this is very different. And I want it to be something that's like really nourishing for for myself and for every person that I get to talk to, like nourishing. And I'm sure that if it's not nourishing for me, it can't be nourishing for the other person. Like I'm so clear about that. Like, it's gotta be so like my heart is really present. I hope, I pray. And in doing that, I can also be present to the presence of others. And we can just like be like, ah, we're here. It's a blessing.
You're so good at that. It inspires me to just kind of let it all out.
What is it you want to let out?
Well, one thing that what you said really struck me because you were talking about, the creative process and how it's so individual, and even different gurus have a different angle on things, and that's, such a beauty. It reminded me of what I was reading in the Bhagavatam about, one of Krishna's names is Rasaraj, which
Mm,
means he's a connoisseur of love, of loving sentiments. And a lot of people have low self-esteem these days. They feel like, they don't have a lot of self-worth, and they have esteem issues, especially, with social media and everybody putting up their highlight reel of their lives, and you feel like your life doesn't quite, match up.
mhm.
But according to spirituality, your worth is your uniqueness, because every single person is a unique being with their own different combinations of likes and dislikes and talents and abilities and loves, and it's a flavor of love, and Krishna wants to taste that flavor of love that everybody has. There's a certain flavor
Yeah.
of love that you have that nobody else can give Krishna. Only you can give that to Krishna. It's like creative individuality. It's actually like this cornerstone of spiritual life. It's our whole offering that we can give to people. So it's something that we should really embrace. This thing that makes us unique, and celebrate that instead of trying to push it down or fit in, or something like that. There are things that make us unique, and Krishna loves that about us,
Mm.
and he wants to taste that.
This is so resonating because I really think that in my mind, like I'd heard that I'm unique and I'm special and whatever, but maybe in my heart, I kind of doubted it. Or it was kind of like, no, I still have to like try to become, or let me try to make myself fit into something that I think I'm supposed to be. And then I think the trend that I'm noticing, Paramananda, is like, wait a minute, there really is something that is unique to me, and I can just celebrate it instead of trying so hard to be like, oh, and this person says don't do this. It's like you're gonna find opposing opinions on everything. People are gonna say, never ask this question, never do that with a proposal, even with work, right? Like whether creativity or work related stuff or anything, it's like, you never do this, you always do that, and like totally opposing opinions. And it's like, when it comes to like self-expression, there really is like an art in it. There's like some art of living and some art of like connecting to yourself and others. That's like, there's not such a rigid structure about it at all.
Did you ever hear that Vedic story about how you can't please everybody with it, with the donkey, the man and his son and the donkey?
Oh yeah. So like they were riding along and then the donkey, go ahead. It's like everyone sees the donkey, the boy sitting on the donkey, and they're like, what a stupid family. Why isn't the dad sitting on the donkey? And then they see the dad and they're like, why isn't the kid sitting? And then they're both walking and no one's sitting on the donkey. Like, what a stupid family. Like they're just walking and the donkeys, right?
And then they both get on the donkey and people are like, look what they're doing to that poor donkey. Like, you just can't win no matter what you do. There's going to be people that are going to criticize you.
Yeah.
So
And I think that the criticism is actually from not being expressed in like not channeling creative energy in a healthy way. And that is why there is all this, like, as you mentioned earlier, with like a failure to appreciate different opinions or be okay with different perspectives. I think, and the critical mindset and even conversation that comes out of that is a reflection of like unexpressed creativity that's just like stagnated and festers. And then it's just like, it becomes like a fireball, right? Because creative energy needs to be expressed. Otherwise, it needs to be channeled. Otherwise, it comes out in all these negative ways. And so I'm on a mission to really, I hope, live it myself and be able to use my creative energy, because I know I have a lot of it. I have a lot of energy. I guess it's like the mode of passion or whatever. And then it's like, if I don't channel it, then it can be destructive. And so I think for me, that's been like, this is part of why I'm even doing this, is like, how do I channel my energy into positive ways? And how do I like create and do something that I really love to do, which is like talk to extraordinary people like you and get to hear about, what lights you up.
yeah, what a great job.
Thank you. Thank you,
Uh,
Paramananda. You're the best. I'm going to stop the recording.